picture, Ken. Or wait, or I'll do the intro, and then you guys can get into it. And then okay, we're live. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I usually do an audio intro. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess up the show. Because StreamYard always gives me trouble. But I have an amazing guest with me tonight. Someone whose research has been off the charts lately. I have with me. First I have my good friend Ken with me from the We Are One podcast. He's going to co-host tonight. But we have with us Nathaniel Gillis. He's an ultra-terrestrial, alien abduction, and demonology researcher whose work challenges the traditional separation between the spiritual and extraterrestrial realms. Having grown up in a haunted house, Nathaniel's lifelong journey into the unknown has led him to study how entities might not be demons or aliens, but something else entirely. He explores the possibility that these beings are ultra-terrestrials or artificial intelligence entities masquerading as both, manipulating human perception across time and dimension. And my friend Ken from the We Are One podcast is a reality researcher diving into Mandela Effects simulation theory and the nature of our reality. He investigates black ops programs, psychological operations that may have altered collective reality, challenging how we understand memory and perception. Tonight, we're going to explore the shadowy intersection between consciousness, deception.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
It's operating the Yamato phenomena. And thanks, Nathaniel. Hey guys, how is everybody tonight?
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me on again. It's great to be back.
Yeah. And Ken, did you want to start off? Did you want to tell them about your picture? What picture do you have? Like,
I'm trying to find it, but I saw you on the Tinfoil Hat podcast, Nathaniel, a few weeks ago, and really enjoyed the shift. Interesting to dive into that, the shift from demonology into the phenomenon. I don't know if it's some kind of artificial technology, matrix technology, whatever it is, but something's been fucking with me for a very, very long time, 4 or 5 years. And probably 3 years ago, I was driving through a cold day to take my son to school, and I'm looking to make the right. And one of my windows was fogged up. And in the window, there's a super detailed symbol. And it's like very intricate. And then it just went away about 2 days later, but it went in and out. And then it disappeared. So I've been asking everyone that I've talked to who might know what that symbol is. It's obviously some kind of a wheel. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I'll try to find it on my computer, but my computer's playing hide and seek, so that's just what happens.
You can send it to me after the show. I'd be more than happy to check it out, brother. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think what he's saying, Nathaniel, is he thinks it might be a sigil, because I know you talk about that, right? That these entities can put sigils on us, they can put sigils on our vehicle, like stuff like that. Is that correct?
Guys, there's a Brazilian researcher named Ronnie Vernay who has been investigating the occult connection to ufology. He's actually, after his investigations, he's actually went back to his house and they've carved sigils into his bedpost and into his comforter on the bed. So this is not a figment of our imagination. It's not something that Nathaniel Gillis is conjuring up. This is it's something the phenomenon does. And I do believe this didn't just occur in the 21st century or in 2025. They've been doing this for quite a long time. And I do believe our government knows about that. So, at this point, it's like, okay, what do we do with this information? Now we have to forget reverse engineering craft. We've got to reverse engineer these symbols and try to track down their origin. And even if and when we do accomplish that goal, even if we do find, okay, if they're Theban or if there's some kind of goetic iconography, we still have to determine intention. And that's going to be nearly impossible to do for everyone who's wondering.
Have any of these symbols been described or linked to like a malevolent? Because it seems to be a lot of neutral stuff, like Mandela Effects, very similar, like undescribable phenomenon, but not necessarily bad, not necessarily good. Like, what are your thoughts about the of that?
Well, the cases I've been working on here lately have been highly malevolent. I think that if anybody is performed upon or acted upon without their will or consent, that's a problem for me. And not just that, but when the phenomenon will intentionally interface with them as a separate intelligence, extraterrestrial, and then sigilize their body, as Austin Osman Spar would say. That is also a big issue for me as a researcher. So the cases I've had lately are malevolent, but the problem is with the data. See, even with MUFON, if we've had cases where these symbols have been misinterpreted as extraterrestrial or intentionally obfuscated, or we didn't have a box big enough to include these sigils in them in the form they fill out, then we as researchers are missing out on possibly 100 years worth of case studies. Not just that, but dealing with the sigilization that is occurring, they appear to be going through 3 stages of manifestation. These 3 stages are formally introduced by Austin Osman Spar, where he talks about the 3 stages of sigilization. Now, it's kind of like a bastardized form, because Austin's philosophy was that you write the sigil, you absorb it, you focus your intent on it, you absorb it, then you destroy it. It becomes a part of your subconscious. Now you ingest it, and then throughout the next week you purge it from your memory and your body, and then it comes back as the fulfillment of that intention. But what we're seeing, again, dealing with the 3 stages of sigilization, at first it's almost always underneath the skin, and then it moves to the surface. Once it moves to the surface, they appear to be burn marks or scratches. Not scratches, but I'm talking about like the way they're inside the skin, not the shape, obviously. And then the body purges the sigils from it. So what appears to be happening here, at least from my perspective, is that if we have ufologists who have no concept of sigilization, who don't even know these as sigils, or that's just symbols, and they're going into homes and they're having these on the bodies of experiencers, not realizing that it's in one of the 3 stages of manifestation. And so what this does, though, is it introduces kind of a new paradigm of research, because in times past, the only way we could even quantify the experience, even malevolent, was through extraterrestrial manipulation or experimentation. There wasn't really research being done that says, okay, by the way, why are they experimenting on the same people and doing the same experiments, by the way, on the same people for 60 years, if they are that technologically advanced? And so that's when people like Dr. Carla Turner, Barbara Bartholomew, James Bartley, all of these individuals came forward and saying, hey, guys, we have a significant issue here because they're not that technologically advanced if they're performing the same experiments. So there seems to be, again, the shadow world that these people are taken into, where the phenomenon controls their perception of the environment. And that's even if, by the way, even if we know of the encounter. Because one thing we're also knowing in the field now, realizing even more and more, is like the only reason we know of these cases of sigilization is because people have photographs of them. We have experiencers coming forward with their eyewitness testimony. And that's only occurring because the phenomenon has glitched and we have eyewitness testimony. This gets back to Dr. Carla Turner. How many abductions are taking place? Remember that, Rob? She said, we have no way of knowing, right?
Yeah,
we have no way of knowing.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to. I was going to say I was a big fan of Carla Turner and Barbara Bartholomew, and also, I have James Bartley on all the time, so I'm right with you on all those researchers.
Well, that was her response to that inquiry, was the only reason we know of these abductions or these experiences is because the phenomenon glitches and allows people to remember. And here's the problem: the body never forgets. The body tells the story. The mind doesn't remember. And so what we're seeing now in the field are, quote, UFO abductions, and yet sigils on the body. And so what we have here again is where the pathology does not match the interface. So there's this incongruent glitch in the dream. Now, I'm going to be presenting a theory that I'm working on, and I call them seams in the dream, wherein the phenomenon will manifest this interface event with the experiencer, and yet what they're experiencing, what they believe is happening to them, is not at all what actually occurs. And later on, through memory regression, or even when they wake up the next morning, their body shows damage that does not match what they actually encountered. And so again, these seem to be artificial events where the phenomenon will literally replicate reality using this construct, design a theatrical performance around them, do what it wants to do, and then afterwards, the experience is left thinking, okay, why was that an extraterrestrial? And yet I'm waking up, right, with something underneath my skin that appears to be an occult icon. So these are glitches here, it appears to be, from my perspective.
So can you define what you mean by it's a glitch? Do you mean that it's an artificial experience, or do you mean that there's some kind of a perceived disconnect between physical and the memory?
All of the above. So my good friend Barry Fitzgerald and his colleague Steve Merrim, they've deduced that the phenomenon, when you're interfacing with it, you have about 20 to 25 seconds before it completely commandeers your consciousness. This was done by virtue of the CE5 experiment with a practitioner trained by Stephen Greer, where they went out to an undisclosed location. They put on a brain monitoring unit upon this individual's head. And she's trying to contact this phenomenon, and it manifested above them. And sure enough, she's watching, right, the glamoring, the light manifestation. They're watching her brain waves. And within 20 to 25 seconds, the phenomenon had induced her into theta brainwave activity. Now, it's in this dream state that we've read about this all throughout the literature, and all throughout ufology, demonology, all of it. We just never had the actual scientific data to say, okay, yeah, it's no longer just a theory, right? It's no longer folklore. This is actual data now. It's real. So, but what we're realizing now is that that's just the evidence of the inducing into the dream. There are other evidences of the dream taking place, and that's where we have the phenomenon replicating reality. Most of these insights are discovered through interface events where entities are manifesting to experiencers. We first realized this kind of pathology in incubi literature when entities were interfacing as deceased loved ones, deceased boyfriends. And for those who are familiar with my work, you know I've kind of beat a dead horse, right, with that kind of work. But we knew that they were being induced into these dreamlike states. And then in the middle of the interface event, the phenomenon was going through various archetypes with their mind, wearing that, like fitting it as a mask. And so it would hold its form. Now, this is very important for everybody watching. It could only hold its form for a certain amount of time. And that's when there are seams within the dream that start to dissolve. It glitches. It's almost like a matrix. It glitches. That's where these experiencers realize, wait a minute. Like I've had one case where an experiencer believed they were interfacing with an alien gray. And then it turned sideways and there was a shadow figure actually wearing this not, I wouldn't even say a literal mask, but it was like projecting itself as an extraterrestrial. And so that's what I mean, that the only reason we know of these cases the way we do, like being able to literally scrutinize them, is because this learning matrix, the phenomenon relies on glitches in and out. And in the middle of the dream, there are seams. There are black cats in the matrix, just enough for us researchers and experiencers to point at and say, if this is real, it can't be because it's glitching. It's doing something. The environment is unable to hold its shape for too long, I should say.
I got something to ask you about that, Nathaniel. I think that's amazing because I've heard experiencers say where they have dreams. So two things I wanted to say here. Like I hear people say they have dreams where they feel like they're taken to like contact scenarios, and there'll be like a holographic landscape that's put around them where, you know, it'll look like their room, but like things are off. Like almost like whatever this intelligence is like projecting a reality to them that they think that it'll be familiar with, but it's not it. But then also I wanted to say, for the audience that's not real aware of your, you know, your theories and stuff, I just wanted to say, like, you know, you think that these aren't demons or aliens. You think we're dealing with something completely different. Do you think it's like an AI intelligence or like an ultra-terrestrial or like, so two questions there. Sorry. I just, you know.
Well, I think we're dealing with a life form that sustains itself through fear and belief. Now, not just fear, but belief. Now, I've had a case come across my desk recently where an individual had woken up to just a loud noise, I should say. It sounded like, she said, somebody that just busted through her front door, walked in and was talking. She said, I heard a crowd talking, massive crowd. And she's peeking around the wall thinking, oh my God, somebody's broken into my home. And it was like another door shut, and it was just a shadow figure. She's thinking, that's crazy. Her next experience is even more chilling, and it kind of fits into this theory we're working on, where she's induced into a dreamlike state, and she's almost like in sleep paralysis, and she's back in her room. She's like, that's kind of weird. I'm back in my room, but she said there were it was like glass surrounding her, but it was chilled. You could barely see through it. And she saw people moving around watching her. And she's thinking, this is very strange. I've got to get out of this dream. This is freaking me out. So somehow she wakes herself up. She's back in the room. Same room. No more, windows. So anyways, she gets a glass of water, kind of collects herself, goes back to sleep, and instantly induced into the same nightmare. Same location. She's on the bed, right? She's looking through the smoky windows. It's glass, and they're all looking at. She can see people looking at her, and that's when she starts realizing, like, there's something trying to replicate my room. It's taken me out of my room, which that's the only theory right now. I mean, there's also the theory we could be talking about, right? If we really wanted to be dark and say, yeah, that was reality. The room was the replica. But my point is, she got back out of that nightmare. Finally, she calls somebody, freaking out, like, I don't know what's going on. I can't control what's happening to me right now, but I just feel this pervasive presence entering into my room, and I'm very scared. So about an hour, she's calm, goes back to sleep, right back in the room. Same thing. Only this time, there was a man crawling on all fours towards her in her bed. So what we're looking at again is this idea that if the phenomenon can replicate a room, then it can replicate a spaceship. And if it can replicate a spaceship, it can commandeer our consciousness enough to make us believe we are in locations that we are absolutely not. Number one. And number two, we are interfacing with entities that may or may not exist. It's nothing new. We have cases in which our literature, where even witches and warlocks were taken to undisclosed locations, thinking, right, they're interfacing with corpses and demons. They're at the side of a mountain, not realizing the phenomenon had created this entire theatrical performance. What they woke up to, right, when the scene in the dream was witnessed, they were being poked and prodded by metallic objects. Yeah, the phenomenon had tailored, and this gets back into Dr. Gary Nolan's research, had tailored the entire interface event to their neurology, not just their belief system, not just what they had a fear of or a faith in, but it literally took all of the stages of what's called aggressive mimicry, right? Evolving along with the individual, along with the species, adapting their characteristics, and then appearing to them as the same species they are. That's called aggressive mimicry. What they realized was a phenomenon can do that within 24 seconds of interfacing. It'll go through all of those stages. And then now it's manifesting to you as something that may or may not be real. And so that's when I get into Plato's wall. If people aren't familiar with that, it's fascinating. It's always enchanted me in my research, where Plato is describing, he's giving a metaphor for ignorance, and ignorance of reality. And so essentially what you have are prisoners that are chained to a cave wall. They're facing the wall, and that's all they can see. The people behind them are lighting a fire, multiple fires, through about 30, 40 years of their existence. And every time the fire's lit, the fire casts shadows on the cave wall. It's so if you and I were to go to them, Rob, and say, hey, guys, what does your reality consist of? They would say whatever these shadows are. Those shadows, they would give us their theory as to what those shadows represent. In reality, that's nothing to do with their environment. They're in a cave staring at a wall. Reality exists outside of them. What I'm talking about is an intelligence that is both the fire and the shadow cast on the wall. It's not just the archetype, it's the architect of the archetype. And so my point here, and this is kind of rooted in this, if the phenomenon can create physiological constructs, and if those shadows aren't just on the wall, but those shadows are now apparitions in homes, if that's just a UAP in the sky, if the phenomenon could create these out of thin air and diversify its intelligence in our eyes, then what we are not studying are apparitions and UAP. What we may be studying is the fire or the intelligence that's projecting them into our reality. Now, I'm not saying that some of these beings don't exist. I'm not saying that UAP don't exist. What I am saying is that we have many cases where, in addition to the intelligence, there's something else present that it's masquerading as. And so when we go into hauntings and we say, okay, like Lord Auerbach's research, well, that's an apparition. It's like, okay. But what they realize, guys, is that they have the apparition. That's what they see. What they captured on camera was something completely different. And what we're seeing right now in the field, from my perspective, is now we're capturing both the shadow and the fire at the same time. Now that opens up a whole new can of worms in the work. Because if this phenomenon is truthfully making us believe, right, that it is apparitions when it really could just be a ball of light, then we as researchers have to sit down with the question and say, maybe a lot of this has been deception. Does it make sense? Hopefully it does.
Yeah. Ken, did you want to go next? Did you?
Yeah, so I think it's important, at least to tell you where I'm coming from, Nathaniel. I think we're very similar in how we view things and how we realize things. I think you can almost substitute the phrase, the phenomenon, or the characteristic, the adjective, the phenomenon for the matrix in my mind. Not the hijacked version, not the Keanu Reeves matrix, but like the holographic overlay of our reality. What could be the phenomenon, but what you're talking about is more of an entity or an interaction between the matrix and our reality in general. So where I'm going with that is, what is proved to me is here's where we're similar. Here's where I believe 100% what you're looking at is that there's an entity that's controlling it potentially, whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's somebody hacking into the frequency to mess with it, because it's getting worse for sure, right? We're seeing signs that it's worse. So if this matrix is being controlled by something or interfered with by something, it's proving to me that not only is it physical, that not a reality that we're in, but it's also simulated. It's a simulated environment, and that goes back to everything you said, Rob. Is that it's simulation in that this phenomenon can manifest itself and override physical matter reality and show itself as energy, as frequency, as vibration, whatever it might be. On multiple levels, it fucked with me. Multiple levels. That's why I know it's simulation. And whether it's simulated environment, whether it's being interfaced with, whether it's being hijacked with, it's real, and it's not neurological for me because I have these proofs with me.
Right. And so that's what I was kind of trying to touch on earlier when I said that there is something nuts and bolts here when it wants to be. This is the paraphysicality that John Keel tried to highlight here, because, again, with Dr. Gary Nolan's research, he's had cases. He had one case specifically where a little boy in France is in a car and he looks up and he sees a UAP hovering above the vehicle. He describes its characteristics by observing it. That's the key point here. And then he describes it to his mother, and his mother is like, well, that's interesting. She takes a photograph of it. It had characteristics that didn't appear to be anything like what the son described. But the son was interfacing with something that was real, but by the time he consciously connected to it through observation, and some researchers, I'm leaning towards this, by virtue of the observer effect, through the conscious connection, it had sought to be seen. Once it is witnessed by the individual, it collapses itself into something And we believe that's something that just collapsed itself into is the entity, is the UAP. And this is the same problem Skywatcher is running into. I remember one interview with one individual. He said that we're having a problem understanding what we're observing when we're observing it. Why? Because when the human mind observes something, specifically with this field, the phenomenon has the ability to stand outside and to trigger the quantum, right? The observer effect, to where it will allow us to observe and then collapse it into something. This is why, again, through these interface events are the most deceptive part of the phenomenon. I remember years ago, somebody made a documentary about ufology and said, I know what I saw. No, we don't, guys. No, we don't. And what we're realizing again is that it's that perception issue. The phenomenon blinds us with our own vision. Why? Because again, that's how we interpret reality. That's how we interpret who loves us, who we can trust. And so in many ways, we are being misled. And that's the biggest issue right now. Now, getting back to the nuts and bolts aspect of this, yes, we do have something that appears to be technological. The problem is that when we actually look at the metamaterial, it comes from Earth. And even with Richard Banderick, he said that 40 years ago, so right now he's a CEO of an aerospace company. But 40 years ago, he had contracted with the United States government to go out and collect metamaterial gifted to us by the phenomenon. And there are two characteristics I would like to highlight for everybody watching, because I believe it really points to what we're talking about here. First characteristic, he said it blended in with its reality. Oops. Number two, once you held it, it was self-assembling. You would pull it apart from each other, would come back together again. But he said that if you held it for longer than maybe a minute, it would dissipate into dust. And so at first blush, right, the casual observer would say that is technology. But Richard Banderick came to a different conclusion. Richard Banderick said that was an indication that because it appeared to be technology, that it was almost a construct itself. It wasn't at all what it appeared to be once it stayed in our environment for too long. And so that's when he believed that we were being deceived and manipulated by another species. And so this gets back into the paraphysicality. Now, here's what we do know, again, about UAP, is that they seem to be weaponizing the same mechanisms we're seeing in demonology and in hauntology. And I'll shut up, guys. I know I'm rambling here, but it's been a while since I've been on your show.
This is absolutely fascinating.
You're good, man. This is awesome. Yeah, great. Go ahead, Rob.
I was thinking about something that I don't want to go too far off track here, Nathaniel, but I interview a lot of people who say they're targeted individuals, and sometimes I feel targeted too, and I was thinking if these entities can make up constructs and stuff like that, like they could easily make up gang stalking scenario situations, like where people will feel like they're being gang stalked. They all kinds of insane stuff. Wouldn't that be kind of true, I guess, in a sense? If it wants you, it will really work to get you. And we're not talking about, again, so somebody asked me, I don't know if it was you guys tonight, but somebody early on another show asked me, okay, do you believe it's demonic? I believe it's self-serving, and I would believe that the function would be seen as demonic, not the form. See, I've learned with this intelligence not to trust the form, to look at the function, period. But with this particular nuance in this intelligence, number one, Dr. Pasuka was asked one time, what's the craziest case study you've had? What's the weirdest thing you've heard from a UAP witness? And this is a demonstration of the control system. She said, well, once they witnessed a UAP, the pilot would go home, go out to dinner with his family, and he would always see a particular face in the crowd staring at him. No matter where he went, he would travel the world,
go to New York City, and he would just be looking. As soon as he'd look, there'd be a face looking at him, a man staring at him from the crowd, and they would follow him everywhere. So what we're looking at again is Jacques Vallée's control system, where if you are in fact a targeted individual, it doesn't have to appear as horns and hoofs to you. That's too easy to discern. It's a voice at night. It's a knock at night, right? It's somebody who cuts you off in traffic. I've had cases of one individual who triggered an entity in a haunting, and virtually every part of her life was attacked. She lost her job. She filed for bankruptcy. Her marriage fell apart. Her dog died. Her rabbit refused to eat. It died. And the very last time I talked to her, it's been a while now, but she had a terminal illness. So what we're looking at again is this idea that if the phenomenon wants to protect itself, and it will, once you see the glitches, right? Once you see the seams in the dream enough to actually realize that there's architecture here. These are not mindless, unguided processes. There's architecture here that the phenomenon is using to insulate and to survive. And we're starting to understand that more and more. The problem is, again, with the shadows on the wall in the cave, we or the phenomenon or us both have diversified its identity, right? These are all different shadows, but they're shadows coming from the same fire. They're all various archetypes, but they're all coming from the same architect. And so what we realize is what these archetypes are. Again, it's the diversification of the phenomenon. They're aliases. This is just my perspective, and I reserve the right to be wrong, of course. But it does seem to be some form of a life form, I should say, a life form that is weaponizing what we call the paranormal to sustain itself. And there are reasons, and I can go into case studies as well.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to go over this. I thought this was really interesting. You said that a lot of times these entities will want people to make altars for them, and I wanted to see if you could tell this story where I heard you tell in another podcast where people thought they were going to a seminar to see a Pleiadian or someone that was in contact with a Pleiadian. And can you know what I'm talking about? And it requested an altar, and they can you tell that story? That was really interesting.
Well, I try to get in, I try to have contacts from all across the world, right? Because here's why. Because in America, our perception of the paranormal, specifically ufology, has been highly moderated by our federal government. And so I first learned that when I went to lecture in the United Kingdom. I'm hanging out with these guys who, wrote episodes of the X-Files. They have 20 NDAs. I'm just picking their brain. That's when I realized, oh my God, we're deficient in many ways in the States because everything is being curated. Even the data we're receiving is being highly curated by our federal government. So knowing that, I've been able, thankfully, blessed even, to connect to other researchers in Italy, Brazil, Puerto Rico, Colombia even. And this researcher is in Brazil, and he said, he goes, here in Brazil, we have a lot of wealthy people. Most of them are into the occult, or they like to bring in New Age researchers and people that channel entities. And he said that we actually had an American researcher who claims to be the ambassador to the Pleiadians. We actually had this individual come over, and they were paid a good sum of money to do a lecture series on Pleiadians. And he's like, so here we are, right? We're in the room, and at the very end of the lecture, the individual goes, okay, who wants to see the phenomenon? And everybody was like, me, of course I want to. That's why we're here. Don't just give me a lecture. I want manifestation. The individual goes, okay. She builds the altar right in front of their eyes. I have a picture of it. It's an altar, and it's a head of an alien right on top of it. And says, okay, here's a piece of paper. Repeat this incantation. And then at the fulfillment of the incantation, we're going to go outside. It was nighttime. We're going to go outside, and the phenomenon will be there. And sure enough, they were forced into doing this. So not only that, the phenomenon manifested above their head outside. light phenomena. So I have photographs of the altar, the idol, which is what it is, by the way, and the light phenomena above their head. So, but here's the problem I'm having is that this intelligence is trying to recontextualize what it is and what it wants. The leading UFO abductee in the world, his son, is openly saying, now we are praying to these lights. Now, Rob, remember that time when I was on your show probably years ago now, and I said, hey, listen, they're praying to them. They're not telling you that, but they're praying to them. This is, again, we're branching into not just phenomenology, but what is this exactly? And so, but that's what I think is going on, that we're dealing with the phenomenon, again, that in order to survive, it has to diversify. And in the diversification of its identity, it evolves. And so, again, this gets back to Kenneth Grant's quote in his book, Outside the Circles of Time, where in times past, these entities would have been called divine deities, old gods, right? Hello, Tumbalong, they're old gods. But now they're choosing to interface as extraterrestrials. But because this is a survival and a servile issue, they're going to include the sigils. Why? Because that's how they manifest in our reality. And they're going to include altars. Why? Because that's the transfer of energy that helps sustain their existence. Now, back to this idea, this concept, if you will, of the statue. It's not just an altar in this particular instance. It was the statue itself. That is an ancient artifact. And our ancestors believe that that statue was the material image of the entity possessing it. So what we're literally looking at with, again, this is not my imagination. I didn't do this. But if you took that and you went to, let's say, Greek mythology, and you watched as the oracles are ascending into the temple, and every time they would, they'd have a statue with a deity inside of it. And from within the statue, the deity would begin to give them a message. Why? Because that is the material image of the God in this realm. That is who the offering, the altar, and all of the attention is being given to. And so what this does is it changes the conversation entirely from secularism to now, what are we really dealing with here in what's actually going on?
Yeah,
so,
sorry, go ahead, Ken.
Question for you. So what are they offering? I mean, and what do you think the phenomenon would be looking to get out of it? And I'm hoping you're not going to say loosh, but it's going to go where it's going to go.
Well, there have been cases of that as well. I'm looking now at the biology of belief. Bruce Lipton, I believe it's his theory, and I'm trying to understand to the best of my ability as to what is being exchanged during this interface events. You know, it's not enough.
Just an observational fact. I mean, is it the observer effect that we believe it's possible, so we're going to observe it and view it?
I believe what it's doing is, and this is a fact, okay, this is not just a theory. Whatever they are, they believe they deserve worship. It's not, again, somebody said, well, that's a human psychological artifact. No, there is an exchange of energy occurring to where the phenomenon almost uses human consciousness to manifest into this reality. That's why it's like, okay, if you obey up to this point, I will manifest to you. Now, what that does is it creates a relationship where manifestation comes through obedience.
It's releasing sovereignty, correct?
Yes, it's the illusion of control here.
You're surrendering to something that you believe is a deity greater than you, and you're giving up your creational value. Yes,
so Crowley would call this auto initiation. Now, by the way, this whole movement of CE5, right? It's self-initiated contact. Crowley would frame that as auto initiation. Whereas other mystery schools would say, okay, in order to be initiated, you have to go to exterior powers or entities, right? Other beings. You're going to help initiate me. Crowley said, no, you have the ability to do that within through auto initiation. And what it appears to be doing, again, is that through all of these interface events, at least with altars and things, it's not just a scenario of submission and worship, that some of these individuals are slowly but surely taking on the characteristics of the entities they're conjuring, to where it's all, again, it's symbiosis, and dare I say parasitism. Now, we know that because when the phenomenon truly manifests, now I'm going to say this and we'll get back into the manifestation here in a second. In my interviews, in my lectures, I've talked about, even on my Instagram account, I've talked about the Iranian spider-tailed viper. Now, I'm going to hopefully connect that to Plato's cave. Where in Plato's cave, you have witnesses, again, that are watching the shadows on the wall, maybe not even realizing that it's the fire behind them, manifesting them, right? Well, with the Iranian spider-tailed viper, what this entity, this intelligence did, he's out there in the desert. It is hungry for birds. So it has been hungry for birds as long as this species has existed. But at some point in its evolution, it manifested a spider at the tip of its tail. It looks like a spider. It looks like a shadow. It's an entity. And what it does is the snake itself will hide in the rock. The only thing the bird would see is the spider flipping itself in the sun, the shadow on the wall, the apparition in the home, the UAP in the sky. And what the bird does, just like the metaphor of ignorance, Plato's cave, is it applies its reality, all of its knowledge, on the spider. I'm attacking a spider. Now here's the problem. The bird is hungry for the spider. The snake is hungry for the bird. So what the phenomenon did is it diversified its identity in our eyes by becoming what we expect to see, what we want to experience, only, by the way, as an interface. And then when there's videos of this, the bird sees, I'm hungry for a spider, but the snake is hungry for the bird. So what you are hungry for is actually connected to what's hungry for you. And so when the bird applies those laws and says, okay, how can I survive? I seem to be more powerful than this spider. It lunges. And by the time it realizes what's going on, there's a sharing of information from the tip of the tail to the head of the snake. And you realize that all of these shadows are coming from one fire. All of these archetypes are coming from one archetype. And that spider is connected to a predator that is now emerging from the shadows. Now, this is what I believe we're witnessing in seances in many, many, many cases.
Time out for one second, Nathan.
Yeah.
I don't know if you are trying to say this or not, but the aha moment for me is that are you making an analogy that by conjuring and wanting something else, we're bringing it into our existence by being hungry for something, we're bringing something else out of this thing?
I think it's manipulating that, absolutely, because it's human nature to want transcendence. It's human nature to want the other. And I think that, and again, I'm talking about the negative aspect here. Again, people don't, right? Hope people understand that here. But even like,
there are two sides of that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I do believe that. And that's been,
I want to get into that too, about the NPC, the potentially soulless aspect of that hunger, and the other side of it, which would be a soul creator's hunger for the opposite. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was that was really good. I like that analogy. I don't know if you were saying it the way I was feeling it.
That works. Pretty damn good. Yeah. So there's this symbiotic relationship that the phenomenon feeds off of. At any point, it can turn parasitic. You know, I had a conversation with an ecologist not too long ago, and he was basically like, Nathaniel, this is a life form. And he's like, and the way it sustains itself, again, is it tries to blend into our reality. And it will create images that do not exist. It's there. Again, it's present. But it's blending into reality. And even when you get into some of the cryptid manifestations where the phenomenon creates another physiological construct, there's glitches, right? The same glitches we're witnessing in interface events and hauntings and demonology. It's in the cryptid field too. I have a good friend in England, Paul St. Clair. He's had cases where entities are bipedal wolfmen, and they're keeping pace with the car that's going 50 miles an hour, but they're barely moving. It's a glitch. It's a glitch. We have abductees who are being abducted by men who are gliding to them. Why walk if you're hovering? It's a glitch. Even some of the entities, again, in cryptozoology, they don't even have a food source to exist, to sustain their existence in that environment. Why? Because many, I'm not saying cryptids don't exist. I'm not saying UAP don't exist. But there appears to be, in Jacques Vallée's words, there appears to be two phenomena. I believe it's one, but he says there's two. There's actual nuts and bolts craft, and then there's craft that seem to be apparitional. And what I'm saying is they're one, in that what it does is it weaponizes the observer effect to be present with us but absent from, to where we only know of what it diversifies itself as. We don't truly know yet what this is. And that's kind of my theory that I'm working on now.
Man, that's really cool. Sorry, go ahead, Rob. Go for it.
One thing I wanted to bring up, Nathaniel, was you mentioned that they people would make statues and idolizations of these things. This is going to sound really funny, but I was thinking, you made me think of haunted dolls, and how an entity can possess a haunted doll. I had a girlfriend who had a haunted doll, and she said that it would ask her to do things, it would ask her to put it in the closet and move it around and stuff. She was having communication, but then it started asking her to have sex with it. So what was crazy is I was thinking about the hybridization part of all this. It seems like that's a thing too, that these entities, they want to either gain human form through hybridization to create something, almost like they're creating and you've told me where these things have manifested as the partner's lover and inseminated, and there's been examples of semen were left behind when women would did you want to talk about that a little bit? And sorry, I kind of mixed two things together there, but I think you see where I'm going with that, right?
It's all good, brother. It's all good, man. So yeah, that is a field I've created called necronetics. In early demonology, theologians were wrestling with whether or not these entities could be corporeal. Even in modern demonology, Christian demonology, these were called watchers that decide to fall. And in doing so, they had progeny. And so early demonology said that, well, these entities, the incubi entities, are incorporeal beings. They're just spirits that are now disembodied, that are seeking a body. The problem is that these experiencers were not just found with secretions on their bodies, which prove corporeality. They were found with sigils on their bodies as well. And so that would point to not horns and hooves exactly, but it would point to a species of practitioners that were trying to self-replicate whatever was in them. So then the model of hybridism opens up to this idea of, okay, we know a spirit can inseminate a woman. Now, we do have some cases, loose a little bit, the data is that they can produce some kind of secretion, but not to actually procreate with our species. So whatever we're dealing with would be a species that's compatible enough to procreate with us, someone. In addition to that, we would have to have somebody who's knowledgeable about sigils and who's actually performing sex magic, chaos magic in order to replicate. That, by the way, is in a category of itself. Again, spirits do not have semen. So, and then Thomas Aquinas came around and said, okay, by the way, here's another theory, which is, it's still incomplete in my perspective. And that is that, well, these entities are going to men in the images of women in order to take secretions from them as a spirit. and then going to women and inseminating them with, again, as a spirit. And so there are holes in that argument because I do not believe that's what's going on. Number one, according to even biblical antiquity, that the watchers that could do that have the ability, but they're chained in darkness. So they have the ability, but they lack the freedom. Now, in the book of Enoch, again, their progeny had bodies, but now they're dead. So now they're wandering on the earth. So they would have the freedom to do it, but not the ability. So whatever we're dealing with, again, has to have the ability, has to have the freedom, and it is employing sigil magic. So I would suggest that whatever we're dealing with, if it exists, which I do believe it is, and it does, would be a species of practitioners here on the earth that would be working directly with them, to where they're not just replicating their own bodies, they're replicating a body for the spirit in them to possess. So we have literally wandering ghosts that will hop from one body. The father will father a son, and that will be the new biological avatar of the entity. But that's called necronetics, and it's a field I've created because, to be frank with everyone, I just realized that hybridism, at least in demonology, never made much sense to me.
So do you feel like they're incorporating bodies of some sort? Do you think they're inside some of the humans here? I don't know if you ever got into
so yeah, this idea of self-replication, again, what we're looking at from my perspective is a species that will inseminate a woman with a fetus, leave their first body to inhabit the second. And so we would have the father inhabiting the body of the son, but we're not realizing that when we're looking at the avatar, we're also looking at the consciousness within it. And so the species that I've been tracking as of late would have to have some real preternatural knowledge, high magic. I'm talking adept to the most extreme degree, and who would have knowledge of antiquity and would actually be employing some of these rituals now. And that's why I'm suggesting here that, again, when you have Sinistrari of Amino saying there's a problem, because the secretions left on the body proves corporeality. Whatever this was had a body. And so that's why I do believe that, again, there's a species here that not yet been quantified properly.
Have you considered that there may be no cause for that effect? I mean, we live in a simulated environment. I think the three of us can agree upon that at the top level of the conversation, right? I mean, I've talked around about this last time. There were the top physicists in the world from CERN have now basically concluded that not every effect has a cause, and that proves simulated environment. And I know where you're going with it, that you want to have the step down causational effect of physical into secretions, but you don't have to have that. When you realize that physical manifestation of objects and energy, or whatever you want to call it, can come out of anywhere. There's no difference between whether it's manifesting a tree that never used to be in your backyard that's now there, or secretions on a body, or sigils. It's all the same. Crop circles, all the same thing. That it's fact now, or it's not accepted fact, but it's fact that not every effect has a cause. And when you deal with that, you've proven simulation theory in itself, and everything's on the table from that point.
Well, you would be dealing specifically with hybridism. You would be dealing with entities that are wanting to exist in the simulation itself, because those sigils and secretions.
Or we manifested them, or the intention to manifest that manifested them.
Well, okay. The problem with that is that these actually led to pregnancies. And then we'd have to manifest the pregnancies themselves, and then we would just collapse into our manifesting everything.
But we manifested the chicken and egg. I mean,
yeah, I guess I can see what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand that, and I'm not debating that. All I'm saying is the top level of this is it's simulated, and Jesus was, the tale of Jesus is that the guy's name wasn't Jesus, but the figure we know as Jesus, Yeshua, whatever you want to call him, that figure was of a virgin birth. That's the myth, right? So same thing. Mandela effect, same thing. No effect, no cause to the effect. Is where I'm going with that. As far as
I understand exactly where you're coming from. What I'm interested in, though, is the fact that okay, I'm interested in what species they hatched. You know, like these secretions and sigils, they originated through dream demonology, to where these experiencers are being induced into dreamlike states. You know, they're thinking, okay, this is just a nightmare, no big deal. The next day, they're waking up with again,
Scoop marks.
iconography, scoop marks, things that actually coordinated with the dream they were induced into. Now, what's also interesting again about this is that this is in Softy Israel. This is some of my old research, by the way. So people go like, Nathaniel, you know, we've heard this a billion times. I get it, guys, I do. But in Softy Israel, you see the sexual pathology come to full fruition, where now the same entities that were leaving sigils and secretions on people were now possessing women who just went to bed one night. And so the next morning they're waking up, they're getting ready for work, and they're having, again, like they're disassociating. What's going on with me? And so after a while, they started demonstrating more characteristics of possession. They go to the rabbi, and the rabbi's looking at them. It's okay, what's going on here? Explain what happened. They're like, I have no idea. I went to bed one night, an entity came to me in the image of my husband, and we copulated in a dream. Now I don't know, I guess I'm possessed. They said, okay, approximately when did this dream happen? A few months ago. So they start doing like this investigation, and they realize that a lot of these women were actually pregnant when they had not been intimate with their husband. Now, this is crazy. Again, this is why, again, if you go into jinn literature, possession, when you have a possessed person, specifically a woman, they would always ask them, have you had a dream of copulating with an entity? So what they realized was that penetration led to possession in these case studies. And so now they're not interrogating, they're just asking them, okay, what's going on? Well, they performed different experiments on the individual, and they realized that they were not just pregnant or possessed by the entity almost. They were not just possessed by the entity, but they were pregnant with it. And you see the transfer of consciousness, where it's like that they were not just pregnant by the entity, they're pregnant with it. And that's the self-replication, whatever that entity was. It was transferring, again, a fetus in the womb, and then transferring its consciousness to be inside of it. And so what's fascinating as well is during the exorcism, when they exorcised the consciousness, when that entity left, so did the fetus. All of the symptoms of pregnancy left as well. Now, we in modernity would call that the missing fetus syndrome.
From alien abduction.
Right. So my point is that there seem to be a lot of corollaries here that point to, again, a singular intelligence that is trying to recontextualize itself throughout history. That's just my perspective, guys.
Have any of those terms, vessels, been studied? I mean, what kind of blood types were they?
Yeah. So
somebody asked a question in the beginning of this chat. We're going to get to that. I want to know about blood types and the studies of these people who are the experiencers. Are they a certain blood type? Because the Nephilims had Rh negative blood. I mean, I think that's consensus, even though it may not be proven fact, obviously, because it's myth. But like, what are we talking about here as far as the vessels that they produced?
Okay, so they take their own. Matter of fact, the only cases we've had where the hybrid exists in this dimension, again, there's going to be a lot of people that say, okay, you're wrong. I get that. Okay. The cases I know of where the old memory did not merge with new matter, the hybrid is basically born, unalive. Dr. Turner had one of these cases where the phenomenon had impregnated a lady, and she was not being intimate with her husband at all. And she's asking the husband, like, I don't know what's going on here. This is not a feasible specimen. She used the term feasible specimen. Baby dies in the womb, and she gives birth to it in the bathroom, and that's all she remembered. Oh, no, sorry, that's not it. She said, again, this is through memory regression with Barbara Bartholic and Dr. Turner. She said, I don't know where I buried it. And Dr. Turner was like, well, what do you mean? You know you buried it, right? She goes, yeah, what'd you bury it in? I buried it in a glass jar. But the phenomenon had blocked off that part of her mind, her brain, that told her where it was buried. So we're dealing with, again, this control mechanism. Now, getting back to those where the old memory merges with new matter, we get back to Barbara, or not Barbara, but Betty Andreas and Luca, where in her abduction, she sees these biological avatars running around in the craft, and she asks one of the entities, what are those? Where are you getting those from? And they said, we are getting them from the fetuses that we're taking. So on one side of the field, they believe, okay, hybrids are here, but there are other arguments, and this is where I lean, is that no, a lot of these beings, a lot of these creatures, hybrids are being taken in order to be inhabited by the phenomenon. And that's just
what's being taken. Do they have the rhesus factor? Because I mean, Rh negative and Rh positive, that's for sure two different species. I mean, well, same species, but different, it's a different hybridization. Are you aware of the positive negative aspect of that?
I do. That's not my forte, buddy. That's more along my buddy Steve Mera's research, and he's starting to get into that deeper, and maybe I'll get into that as well. But whatever we're looking at here, again, it's almost like a learning matrix, right? It will fabricate an environment around us. It will do what it wants to do, and maybe we'll remember it. And then if we do remember it, we have to question the memory itself. And that it's an awful place to be for our species.
What's your blood type? Do you know?
I don't. I don't. I have to look at my license.
I'm a negative. I'm an O negative. I have one of the rare blood type. I know that I'm a negative. But I mean, I think this is all fascinating though. Like, so let me ask you this: like, what do you think their end game is? Like, do you think they want? I mean, because I wanted to tell you something, Nathaniel. I haven't told you about this. Like, since you've been on my show last, like, I had some kind of weird shit happened to me, like, and my audience knows about this. They were with me throughout the whole thing, like, and I think Ken knows about this too. So I had an entity attachment, like a real, and you might be interested in this, but I never saw a demon, I never saw an alien, I never saw a ghost. All it felt like energy would attach to me. Yeah. And at times it felt like a creature, like an astral parasite would be on my head, or it would latch onto my ear, all these different things. And I didn't know if it was someone using black magic, I don't know if this is what we would consider the phenomena, or I don't know if this is like minions of the phenomena, because again, it felt like it wasn't like a full-blown possession. It felt like parasites, but what I had to do is I had to like learn how to fight it off energetically. And it honestly took like 5 or 6 months to get rid of this shit. It was horrible. You know what I mean? But I can finally say I don't have it anymore. But I noticed they do try to attack people during the full moon. Like, I don't know if that's using magic or what.
Well, I've had cases like that too, right? It's always like 3 a.m., 3 in the morning, where something happens. It's not just that hour of the night or morning. The data that's been collected by myself, Barry Fitzgerald, and Steve Mera suggests that it attacks people with low iron content. This is why, like in demonology, if a woman was on her monthly, all the blood that's being lost, there's iron in that. It would diminish their iron intake. The phenomenon would attach itself to them. So now what we're looking at is the consumption of iron in order to build immunity to the phenomenon. Now, Steve Mera's latest research, which, by the way, if you guys are interested, again, I suggest everybody, if you don't like me, whatever, get the meat out, spit out the bones. I do it with everybody in the field, right? But my point here is that we are doing a series called the NHI sessions, and I believe our last one, Steve gets into the fact that iron has the ability to absorb frequencies. And with the phenomenon, again, what we're realizing is that the phenomenon rides on frequencies. And so this is architecture, by the way, right? It's not just we name it and claim it. We'll just name it something and that's all we need to do. No, now we're looking at paranormal architecture, wherein the phenomenon will materialize, again, at certain times, under certain conditions. Why? Because it wants to sustain its existence and its form. And so when you do iron intake, again, because it's absorbing the frequency the phenomenon uses to manifest, it hinders the phenomenon from keeping its form for too long, I should say. It's number one. Number two, now we're talking about architecture here. The phenomenon relies on a paranormal matrix, a learning matrix when it manifests. So in this interview, I've highlighted the nuance where when it wants to, it can appear as something to us, but meanwhile be something completely different around us, right?
Yeah.
It's the simulation, it's the matrix, if you will, and an extension thereof. Well, in order to do that, it has to create a certain environment. And so Stephen Barry had been having cases where the phenomenon was materializing objects out of thin air. Which, Ken, what does that imply, right? Just implanting something in our environment. And we're looking at this going, where did this come from? It was not here yesterday. And so they had cases where literal objects just showed up in homes. Nobody purchased it. Nobody brought it from another friend's house.
That's me.
Yeah. You had a port? Is that what you're saying? Or I'm sorry, you answered the chat.
He does. He has weird shit happen to him all the time where shit appears and disappears.
I have lots of physical objects that have appeared to me or been shipped to me, have no cause to the effect. The iron thing is interesting to me that you just, I don't want to backtrack for 1 second.
Yeah.
The iron thing is an RH negative trait. It's usually it's a anemic trait adjective revolving that. Means you're low on iron or you use a lot of iron, potentially negative RH blood types. If you're accurate, I've never heard that frequency thing. Maybe that's what they're manifesting. They're able to frequency manifest and they're going negative, where I am also RH negative. I'm manifesting positive things for the most part. But
that's some of the most fascinating research being done right now. And I don't know if that session between Steve and I has been published yet, but if it has, I'll send it to you, bud. It's incredible. Steve's amazing. But so they were dealing with this concept again of trying to map out paranormal architecture, knowing again that, okay, if there's shadows on the wall, what's the wall? Like, what are we really dealing with here? And so again, they had cases where the phenomenon was just materializing objects out of thin air. They weren't purchased by the homeowner. No children brought them home. What's going on here? Well, one day, a married couple are having a verbal issue. They're yelling at each other, and the husband looks down and he sees this figurine moving on a table. In a fit of rage, he grabs it, opens the front door, throws it out the front door, it shatters. Again, he's angry and he goes back inside and he looks back down on the table. The figurine's back there. So Barry and Steve are like, uh-oh, what's going on here? It really started messing with their paradigm. And so they had another case after that, which again, this is in the 35-year career where they're trying to piece together the architecture here. They had another case where a married couple had purchased a group of coffee mugs, kind of like at a Costco thing, where you go and get a bulk or whatever. They got a multiplicity of these coffee mugs made by the same manufacturer. They're the same, virtually the same. Well, one of the coffee mugs goes missing, and they can't find it for months. They still have the other three present. The fourth one's gone. And so they looked everywhere for it. Next thing you know, they get a phone call. Steve does. The family's ecstatic. We found the fourth coffee mug, and you're not going to believe where it was. Where it was? It was in the kitchen, right where we left it. Where we've looked, right? By the way, we've looked for it, and it's never been there.
How long was it until they found it?
I think it was 2 months. I could be wrong on that. I have to ask Steve. But it'd been a while, and that's not even like they had to look for it in the same spot too. You know what I mean? It was just right out in the open now, and they're thinking this is crazy. It's really weird. So what Steve does is he sends that coffee mug that manifested to a laboratory. They run tests on it, and they did what's called a bench test, where it's not good enough just to test the object, right? Materialized. You have to compare it to something, another one just like it, to get a control, right? What's called a bench testing. So he takes another coffee mug, sends both of them together, and comparatively speaking, the coffee mug that materialized had a different isotopic ratio than all of the others. And the question was asked, is that coffee mug, did it change the isotopic ratio based because it materialized, dematerialized? That's one theory. Or was it not really real at all. Maybe it was a replica, right? Where the phenomenon had manipulated matter to appear like all the others, but it could not manipulate matter from the atomic level. So on the informational level, to where the isotopic ratio wasn't the same. Now, to the eye, identical. But to the phenomenon, one's a replica of the other reality. Okay. So
it wasn't made at the same time.
Right. Right. Exactly right. There you go, bud. You're exactly right, Ken. Great point. And so they're thinking themselves like, okay, this is first of all, what are the implications here? Second of all, what is the phenomenon doing? Because the phenomenon doesn't waste any energy. It's very methodical and strategic. And so the third case that really shattered their paradigm and really added not just their research but my own as their friends, I'm thinking this is mind-blowing. But they had another report that manifested in a home out of nowhere. The homeowner's like, I don't know where this came from. It's just kind of strange. So what Barry did is Barry and Steve, they said, okay, well, we're going to remove it from your home. We're going to place it in a storage space. We're going to leave it alone. We're going to see what the phenomenon does. So they remove it. 2 days later, they get a phone call from the family. Thank you for everything you guys have done for us. No more shadow figures. No more balls of light. No more knocking at night. No more, it's all gone. So you guys are the best researchers ever. Well, Barry and Steve, again, they're methodical. They look at each other and go, wait a minute. So they take the reported object, place it back in the home. Phenomenon materializes. So what this, yes. Now, that's architecture. These are not mindless, unguided processes. Number one, the phenomenon has the ability to materialize objects out of thin air into this environment and to attach itself to them. Now, we have issues here with respect to reports. We think we're seeing them in demonology. Because knowing that the architecture suggests that the phenomenon, when it wants to anchor itself in this environment, will materialize an object that was not purchased by the homeowners. It's alien to its environment. It will anchor itself to that. If you remove it, the phenomenon has to triangulate, looking for that source that it materialized into our environment. Now, keep that in mind. In demonology, some of the most malevolent demoniac cases, the worst possession cases of Malachi Martin, Gabriel Morth, Adam Bly, there's a whole list of them. My point, though, is the same mechanism seems to be employed in these cases. Because in these environments, you have the exorcist dealing with the phenomenon, and the phenomenon does not want to evacuate that biological avatar. And so in the worst cases, what the phenomenon will do is that that individual will begin to regurgitate reports. Small objects that were never ingested by that individual. They will come out of the cavity. They are collected by the exorcist, and the Vatican themselves, they consider them, again, demonic manifestations, but they'll even tell you that in order to rid the environment, they will take them, they'll place it in not just a sacred space, but a storage space. Because they believe the phenomenon had anchored itself to the apports that it manifests into this dimension. So the research I and others are doing, looking at all this, right, is, are we living in a construct? And that does seem to be true.
Yeah, I would be interested to know the background story of those possessions, because the beginning of my entire I don't even want to say awakening process, but when I started realizing that this was a simulated environment, that thing happened to me first, Nathan. I had a cable box that I left on a table for a friend. Went out of town, came back. Guy says it's not there. I'm like, nope, it was there, 100%. Left it there. I told the story about 10 times, and it was gone. Nobody knew where it was. Gone. About 6 months later, it's sitting in plain sight on another spot close to that, but on my dryer, plain as day. And I'm like, I was freaked out. freaked out. Like, what the hell is going on? How did this thing get here? There's no way. I've been searching for this thing for 6 months. I asked my son, my wife, I video recorded them, and check this out. I got video of me asking them, hey, you remember that thing I was looking for? Do you remember all this stuff, this situation? Yeah, got it. Why? What happened? I said, don't fuck with me. Where did it go? Like, I found it. It came back today. Well, a month later, Nathan, my phone that I had saved to it went into DOS mode and reset itself, deleting all that footage and stuff. So it got rid of the evidence.
It's exactly what we're dealing with.
Of me documenting some of this stuff. It's absolutely bananas, the stuff that I've seen. But that was the initial start of all this stuff that happened to me. And nothing has been negative. It's all been positive. It came about because I was given a diagnosis of an autoimmune disease. And I did a 5-day water fast, and I did all these things to manifest a different outcome for my future. And then the cable box happened like within a month, and then boom, all this shit starts happening to me, orbs, all that stuff. So I would be interested to know. That's a long story short, but I'd be interested to know what was the manifestation of those of the person that or the family that it was attached to demonically, because I haven't had that experience. And again. But I think that I potentially could have had that experience had I had that outlook on the situation. I think it's possible. I don't know.
Well, I have no idea why it does some things to others and not to other people. You know, I know people that have had nothing but good experiences with the phenomenon. And then I know people who've had nothing but horror. And so I think that, again, that we are dealing with good powers, that we're dealing with highly benevolent entities. You know, again, I first got into this field because I was studying angelology. You know, I grew up in a pastor's home. So that's how I was fascinated by the phenomenon at first. Like, oh my God, you know, I want to hear all about the angels. Now, I had to kind of balance that with my experience, right, with the darkness. And so when people usually hear my research, they don't realize that I'm kind of, not that I am an oncologist, right, obviously, but an oncologist only studies that portion, right, of research. And that's how I approach what I'm doing here, is trying to help people that are like me, who, believe it or not, I've met them that are 60 years old, but they've had experience as a kid. And it doesn't matter if they're CEO, an executive, or what. Sometimes the phenomenon will trigger that part of them, and they'll go from 60 to 8 real quick.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to point out was a lot of people, and I think you would vouch for this, is like, you know, I can understand people manifesting stuff in their reality, but like a lot of people that had abduction experiences and stuff like that, they didn't ask for it or want it. Like, they were just living normal lives, and it just happened to happen. You know what I mean? Like Jim Sparks, like, for example, like, he was just living a normal life, and all of a sudden he started getting abducted. Like, so for some people, it starts happening out of nowhere where they can't control it.
Or they start to their body starts to remember what their mind was forced to forget. We've had cases like that too, you know, and it's just difficult. And so that's why and again, I can only focus on what I can focus on. But one thing that we do know now is that these are not accidents. You know, even, again, there's this whole mythology within the paranormal that the trickster exists. That's just a trickster. Or that's the noisy ghost. That's the poltergeist. What we're realizing now is that's not true. Where, like, the phenomenon in malevolent hauntings will throw things around the room, amplify the sound and the environment to make the most impact on you. You know, Steve had another case like this where something fell off the wall. It shook the whole house. It was a small object. And so they went and replicated the experience. Okay, knock it off the wall. Barely made a sound, but the phenomenon amplified that noise. Why? So we could get the attention of everybody in that house. And then once it amplified the fear, it almost re-energized itself. It almost sustained itself. And then now it goes in and we start to see agency. It actually does something. So that's why, again, like me personally, when I first got in this field, I went from angelology to demonology to ufology. And then I realized, like, maybe we're dealing with a single source. And people get caught up in this concept of, well, aliens aren't demons, demons aren't angels, angels aren't Nephilim, and this shadow's not that shadow's, and they're not realizing, but all of them are being projected by fire. And if that's the case, it would make sense as to why in the skull experiment we had all of them in the same room at the same time. We had all of the shadows on the cave wall, all the archetypes, right? We had the guide. No, there was a guide there. We had the extraterrestrial. We had Mr. Blue there. We had the spirit team on the other side controlling the seances, okay, the experiment. That at a certain time of the phenomenon's choosing, it had kind of taken the members into different initiatory stages, where once the phenomenon actually incarnated into that room, what you had, again, I'm going to keep beating this dead horse, right? You had the shadows on the wall, different archetypes, where you had in hauntology, you have an apparition, right? And then the New Age, you have the guide. And then in ufology, you have the alien. And in parapsychology, you had deceased scientists. All of them were present in different stages of the experiment up until the phenomenon manifested in the room. It took all of the archetypes and collapsed them into one. Now you have an apparition of an alien gray telling them, I am your guide. So this is why, that's one of the reasons I and others are thinking that it points back to the origin of these shadows, and that is, it appears to be an intelligence.
So I want you to sit with this, Nathan. You don't have to give me an answer now. I'll take your thoughts, obviously, but I've been pondering these things for years, the same way that you have, probably longer than I have. But I've been noticing things and researching things. I have a few tenets now. I don't believe that we're all the same. I think that there are hybrids of us, whether it's blood type, or there are tweaks, and I really now starting to believe that we have different creators, potentially different most highs that have created, either you could call them the soul, the soulless, whatever it might be. But I'm not going to put in the categories. But if we don't have the same creator, if you play with this postulate for a second, if we don't have the same creator, number one, we won't have the same OBEs or NDEs or psi experiences, psi phenomenal abilities, and we wouldn't be able to manifest the same or have the same experiences in this reality. Would you agree with that, or do you understand where I'm going with that?
Well, that would be based on consciousness, right?
It would be based on your creator, your God. Like, I mean, I don't believe that we're all created the same. I just don't.
Okay.
You can tell somebody a Mandela effect, and you get them off their fact in like 2 seconds, and then they go somewhere, they go run away, and I'm going, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that guy? Like, there's something wrong with. There's something missing there, or whatever it might be. There's other things that happen that you don't believe that either consciousness level or base level were not the same. And I'm not saying that I know for sure, but if I play with it and I say that, throughout our evolution of consciousness, we don't have the same creators. You look at the fallen angels or the demiurge, the Gnostic viewpoint, potentially that there are some of us that have a divine sovereignty, a divine intuition, whatever you might call it. If we're different, if some people are different than other people, why would we think that we have the same interaction with this reality? We wouldn't. We wouldn't. Some of us would. Some of us, if you did not have a soul, playing with that postulate, if you didn't have a soul when you had it a near-death experience, you wouldn't have the same near-death experience that I would have. You wouldn't.
I would. I'll tell you this and I can't go too much into this because it's not my research. And it's not because people say Nathaniel's trying to gatekeep. No, I'm not. It's not my work. But for those who are watching, I can. But for those watching, Dr. Barry Fitzgerald here, and I don't know when it's going to come out. Maybe this year. I don't know. It's pretty late. Probably next year sometime. He's going to be coming out with his theory, and it touches on that, and it's very, very, very interesting. But I don't know. I do believe that obviously that we're not all created the same. I wish I could be LeBron James.
I don't.
I'm 5'8".
That dude's
I'm 5'8".
That dude's not human. You don't want to be that. I'm telling you.
Well, there are other people, right, that I'd like to be, on my bad days where I'm just getting beaten by the phenomenon. I'm like, well, I'd rather not be Nathaniel. So I completely get that approach. I just think that from my perspective, and I've been telling people this here lately, is like the questions I was asking when I first got into this research, they're completely different now, and it's unfortunate because a lot of people want to pigeonhole me and say, okay, Nathaniel, just call it this. And that's not good enough for me, right? If an oncologist said, okay, Nathaniel, we're just going to call it cancer, and that's all you need to know, that doesn't really tell me how to treat it. Doesn't tell me the root. Doesn't tell me the origin. Doesn't tell me what I have to do as a person to interface with it and to understand what it is. And so there's this movement in the field now, and I see it everywhere. Let's just call it this. Name it this.
Put
a placeholder.
Put in a box.
Right. Define it. Right. And limit it. And so that's why it's been difficult, because my area of research, it's niche, and so it's kind of like I got one group coming at me and the other group. But at the same time, we are getting some answers, and I'm to the point now where even if we're not getting the right answers, at least we're starting to ask the right questions. And one of those questions is, okay, do we live in a construct? And if so, who's in charge of that?
Yep.
So
I would want to add one more thing,
That's a good point.
Nathaniel. I think you are paying attention to everything. You're not put into a box because your discernment won't let you be put into a box. You're searching for truth. This whole thing is your research. You're a reality researcher as well. Whether you research on somebody else's topic or not, it's playing a role into your theories, and I commend you for that, because most people won't do that. They'll hold on to their theories like it's their livelihood, and that's how you find anything. You're not going to find it. You're going to get kicked the wrong way.
You're right. You're right. And anyways, I completely agree, Ken. You're hitting the nail on the head. And, some days are better than others, but at the same time, the research is going forward. That's really what it's all about.
And let this journey take you wherever it takes you, dude. Go ahead, Rob. Sorry.
I mean, it's okay. I was going to ask you, and I think you've talked about this a little bit, Nathaniel, but have you been targeted by the entities, or have you been messed with by the entities because you're exposing this?
Not just me. And people are going to freak out because they're like, man, we just spent 2 hours with you, Nathaniel, and now you tell us. But, I've had shows cancel on me because, I did an interview or something, and somebody, gets manifestation and stuff. But so here's the deal. The phenomenon knows all of our weaknesses, and our weaknesses are our weaknesses. They're individual to the person. And so, like, I have researcher friends where the phenomenon would, again, for those who are in this field or want to be in this field, here's kind of a lesson from my experience. When you get the attention of the phenomenon, when you finally make eye contact with it, Nietzsche said, when you look into the abyss long enough, the abyss looks back into you. It's impossible to experience the phenomenon without being experienced by it. There is that interface. And usually what happens when we get too close is we feel it. It's the same feeling as an attachment, but it's not an attachment yet. It's just you feel it. And it's like, oh, and I have, where I just relinquish all of my research, set it on my desk, and I've left the state and went out and had a vacation for a week to get it off of me and to get me off of the research. So that's the first stage. The second stage is it will threaten people around you, or will threaten you. It'll show up in your room at night. I've had an individual who also worked with Dr. Carla Turner, was an experiencer. And he worked at a factory. And so what he was doing was he would play my interviews on the factory floor, or they would be working and he'd have it playing with his coworkers. Well, one day I get a message by this individual, and he was catatonic. He was freaking out. And he's like, Nathaniel, please tell me you're okay. And I'm like, I'm out to dinner, with my family. What's going on? He said, well, last night I was visited by an entity. It spoke to me in a dream, came to him in a dream and said, stop looking into Nathaniel Gillis. Don't look at him. Don't mention his research at all. Leave him alone. So I thought, okay, that's not good. So before that, though, and I forgot to mention this, before that, I had gotten that feeling, right, where I'm too deep, too dark into this stuff. I've got to pull back and preserve myself. And in one day, I got 2 different emails from 2 different experiencers. Both of them said that my guide wants you to know that they'll be waiting for you when you die if you don't stop this research. 2 different emails. So it has not went as far as it went with some of my other researcher friends, to where now they're inside your home. You know, I have an individual I've lectured with who had put in a new security system. The company calls them because something was tripped, and they're actually on the phone with them. Do you realize that there's somebody in your house? There's nobody here. They're right behind you, sir. We see them on camera. You need to leave. Get out. So that's what happens. And again, there's even worse things the phenomenon can do. You know, Barbara Bartholomew, Dr. Carla Turner, you're due for an adjustment. Leave this stuff alone. And next thing you know, right, you have tragedy, or you have cancer, or you have people. Now, that's not just a theory, by the way. Another researcher I was friends with was Paulino. We weren't very close, but I had been on a show and we talked sometimes. Paulino got very, very sick extremely fast. And one of his last posts on social media, if you saw it, Rob, where he's detailing, again, his theory was that it's not just interdimensional, but there are multiple universes. And he, like in his lectures, he would draw 2 bubbles and they would meet together, right? They'd meet together like that. And he'd say, okay, you know, and that bridge and that connection, that's when the paranormal manifests. So he wasn't really, you know, his research wasn't as dark, right? His theory wasn't dark. But there, before he passed away, he had put on his Facebook, and he listed all of the researchers he knew that had died in the last 5 years. And there were many of them. And he said, you know, he goes, now I'm being targeted and I don't know what's going on. But whatever, again, when the phenomenon wants to, there's a sting in its tail, and it will fight to control our perception of it, unfortunately.
Wow, that's scary. Holy shit. Well, we've been going a while. I was going to say, I don't have any more questions. Ken, do you have any more questions?
Can we leave on a positive note here, Nathaniel? You know, we talked a little bit about, you know, the manifesting, or the ability to manifest this inside this reality or this phenomenon. Do you have stories, or do you have a single story of a positive manifestation working with the phenomenon? Because I really do believe that I'm sovereign of this. And I, you know, I'm not going to kill myself. Just put that out there right now. I don't have any ailments. I've actually healed myself on many levels. What positive manifestations could you speak to? Do you have anything you could talk to people about?
Of course, yeah. So again, when I was growing up, I was a part of evangelicalism, and I cut my teeth on stories of angelic intervention. Fascinated. To this day, I'm absolutely enchanted by that research. I can't even articulate how passionate I am about it. Love it. And one of my favorite ministers was Jonathan Suber, and he talks about how he was, I think he was in Mumbai, and he was just very ill. He had food poisoning. He was very, very, very sick, and he's laying in the hotel room, and he thought he was going to die. And he says that it's pitch black. He said, in the darkness, a door opens, and in walks a man. And he said, I could see people walking by on the other side of the door. This is weird. This freaks me out. And he said this man walks over to him, puts his hand on Jonathan's chest, and said, Jonathan, I'm going to pray for you, and you're going to be healed because you have a great work to do. And he was healed. The next hour, he's up walking around. But he questioned, right? That is another reality. And so I do believe 100% that there is good out there, and that there's a balance, if not, you know, the good outweighing the bad, I should say. So I'm enchanted by that. And there are so many cases where I can talk about my own life, or just, you know, my grandmother, when she had died, or she knew my research. So what had happened one day is I got an invitation, my very first show, Rob, before we even met, bud, and you too, Ken, before we even hung out. I had never done a show in my life. And I got an invitation to be on Coast to Coast AM. And so I'm like, oh my God, big Art Bell fan here. I was nearly losing my mind for this. I was like, oh my goodness. So, but they wouldn't let me on unless I had a landline. And it's like 2019. I don't have a landline. I just have a cell phone. So my grandmother, right, who again, stage 4 cancer, was like, Nathaniel, I want to do this for you. I'm going to put in a landline because I want to hear you on Coast to Coast. I'm thinking, all right, that's fine. So she does. Well, out of nowhere, I do the interview. A few months later, we haven't removed the landline. Well, I get a phone call at the house, and it's like 1 a.m. My parents are like, Nathaniel, you got to get yourself together. We're rushing. We're rushing to the hospital. Your grandmother thought she was just sick, thought she had a cold, but it was sepsis that had set in. And it was too late. And so now she's on life support. So about 30 minutes later, I get a phone call from Carol Staten. And I'm thinking it was her partner at the time, her boyfriend at the time. But I'm thinking, we've never talked ever on the phone. Wow, what are you doing? So I get 3 phone calls. I get a voicemail. Before I even check the voicemail, I call the number back, and it's the landline she had put in my office. So I received 3 phone calls from a landline that she put in my office. So then this is what's weird, when I actually called it back with my cell phone, I could hear it ring. But then what I mean is I did that, but I actually listened to the voicemail, and it was her vitals I could hear in the hotel or the hospital room. Beep.
What?
Freaked me out. I kid you not. Hand to God. And what does that mean? Yeah. And I ran an experiment to where I called my cell phone from the landline. I would have to call it, hang it up, pick it up again, call it, hang it up, do that 3 times. You couldn't just redial. And so there's something out there. And I do believe that there is benevolence and there is malevolence.
That's amazing. Yeah. Now, I'm glad you got on Coast to Coast, man. That had to be like a dream come true. I was a huge Art Bell fan too, so that was. Who'd you go on with? Were you on with Nori, or were you George Knapp?
George Nori. I've been on there, I think 4 or 5 times now, but I think they've all been with George Nori. The producer called me an Art Bell baby, and I'm like, man, I'm 37 years old, and then I realized, yeah, he was on there for quite a long time, so it makes sense.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us are, you know what I mean? And he influenced like a lot of them. Yeah. Well, this was amazing, man. And are you taking orders for your new book, The Skin That Crawls? I saw when you were on Sean Patrick Hazlett's show, he had a link for that. I don't know if you wanted me to include that or.
That's fine. I still am. And I see here in the chat, someone's mentioning Parasymposia. So here's the deal. I've been on hundreds and hundreds of shows, and there's some things I can't say on them, other things I can. I'm creating my own platform, and it's called Parasymposia. And for those who want to join it, you can just sign up for it, and you can actually go there right now and sign up for early access. But it's going to be about my research in necronetics, and then from time to time I'll have other experts. Not that I'm not an expert. Other experts that are experts, by the way, on with me. So I'll have Steve Mera will be on there a few times. But it'll be centered around my research and my specific theories. But guys, thank you for having me on. It was a real pleasure, and I didn't spaz out with my ADHD this time, so that's a big W.
This was awesome, man. I just wanted. How did they find that Parasymposia? How do we get to that?
Just go to parasymposia.com. PARASY. Yeah, SYMPOSIA. So yeah, parasymposia.com. But yeah, guys, thank you for asking such great questions.
Yeah, and Ken, did you want to?
Awesome, dude. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Did you want to tell people where they can find you, Ken, and stuff? And thanks.
Yeah, you can actually finally find me. The AI has decided it was going to let me on YouTube, so that's cool. You can type in "We Are One" podcast. I'm now searchable. Took 2 years, but searchable now, so that's cool. But yeah, still looking to find some answers. So Nathaniel, I appreciate it. That was awesome.
Thank you, Nathaniel. This was amazing. You always do amazing podcasts, man. They're hands down amazing. They're like amazing, man. Like this was really good, and we had a great audience. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it a little more.
All right, thanks, guys.